From the heart of Silicon Valley in the beautiful San Francisco Bay Area, I am Sudipto Chatterjee and this is Economically Speaking with Atanu De. On Economically Speaking, we talk about economic topics and how they affect our world. Atanu, wish you and your family a very happy and prosperous New Year in 2016.
Hi Sudipto, happy and prosperous New Year's to you and as well to all our listeners. Happy New Year to you all.
Oh yes, of course, how can we forget? Okay, listeners, very happy New Year to you. Hope you keep listening to us for the next 52 episodes over the course of each week. Thank you.
And do send in your questions. We need to have them send in their questions.
Yes, you can send us questions at our Facebook page, over Twitter, or even send us an email. We will discuss all of those at the end of each episode anyway, but just for reference, you can send us messages at Twitter at EconSpeaking, and we are at facebook.com/economicallyspeaking. So, Atanu, in a previous episode, we were talking about agriculture and how better technology and better access to capital makes people more productive, therefore reducing the total number of people needed in agriculture. So the conversation seems centered around agriculture. Is it really that important?
Yes, agriculture is the most basic activity that an economy has, any large economy has. And that's very simple to understand. After all, we all need food regardless of what we do. So agriculture provides the foundation for all other activities. If you didn't have food, we won't be able to do anything else. So in the initial stages of development, most people in an economy are involved in agriculture. That is, historically, if you look at it, there was a time when human beings were hunter-gatherers. And then from hunter-gatherers, we became settled agriculturists. So you had settled farms. And then from farming, it was the major occupation of most people in the world. And then later on, when farming became productive enough that all the people were not required to do farming, they could do other things, then all the non-agricultural work took off after that. So you need to have enough food as a necessary thing, and after that, food is necessary, but it is not sufficient. We need clothes and shelter and so on. And so the other sectors of the economy develop. The fact is, if there is not sufficient agricultural production, then nothing else will happen in that economy.
But is it necessarily true? For example, let's take the islands of Hawaii.
Yeah.
All they produce over there is sugarcane and pineapples and coffee.
Okay, so it's true, sugarcane and pineapple and coffee are agricultural products, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
But then you could have a city, an economy of a city like, say, New York City.
Mm-hmm.
New York City doesn't produce any agricultural products. It's a lot of people doing other things.
Mm-hmm.
But somewhere the food has to be produced. So you can produce machines somewhere, and somewhere else you produce food and you trade between these two regions.
Mm-hmm.
The footprint of a city like Mumbai or New York City is not just the city alone, but all the stuff that it imports from outside the city to do all the things that people in the city do. So agriculture, of course, is at the foundation of everything else. If you don't consider all subunits of the world, but consider the world as a whole, it has to produce a certain amount of food for all the people. And then if all the people are not required to produce the food, then you can do the non-agricultural things like manufacturing and mining and services and so on. Now, what is it that increases agricultural productivity? Agricultural productivity increases through better technology. That is, you know how to do things what kind of seeds to use, how to grow them, and technology also includes improvement in the kind of seeds that you have, high yield varieties of different things. So if you have better technology and then you have better capital is the machines that you use, and then you have better fertilizers. How do you manage things such as the soil? You use water, and so you need to have some technology which makes water more productive. All these things included increase agricultural productivity, and that releases labor from agriculture to the other sectors.
Wait, so you just said make water more productive?
Yeah, so you could take a technology like drip irrigation. You could throw a lot of water onto the fields, or you could use water more efficiently by bringing the water to the plant roots so that less of the water is lost through evaporation. So in places like Israel, they have developed technology which is very frugal in the use of water.
Okay.
Technology also gives you better seeds that give you higher yields, as well as the plants are not subject to all kinds of bugs and so on. So they are pest resistant. And of course, you use technology in terms of the pesticides that you use. Overall, as time goes by, agriculture becomes more and more productive. And therefore, like in a country like in the United States, agriculture only occupies about 2% of the population of the United States. The rest of the people, that is 98% of the people, can do other things. And that is only made possible because agriculture has become really productive. In a country like India, on the other hand, agriculture employs approximately 60% of the labor force. And that means that only 40% of the people are available to do other things. Now, what are the other things that we do? We do all kinds of everything that we are using right now is produced or manufactured by people who are not involved in agriculture. And poor countries are have a larger percentage of their population in agriculture. The reason is that agriculture income is, see, a farmer's income is amount of food that the farmer produces and sells it to others. So if 60% of the population are involved in producing food, then their income would be whatever the 40% of the people who are not in agriculture pay for the food part of it. Now, food doesn't is not a large part of our expenditure in rich countries. Food is a large part of a person's expenditure in a poor country.
But wait, in a country like India, we don't consume all the food that we produce. Some of it is exported as well.
Quite right. So, in a country can have a large percentage of its population or its labor force in agriculture and export the agricultural production to other places, and therefore have a high income. It is quite possible to do that. New Zealand, for example, is a very small country with a few million people, and one of their major part of their economy is grassland agriculture, because they have a lot of land and there is livestock, sheep, and so that's basically an agriculture related kind of thing. And New Zealand can be rich because it's a few million people there, and they can export a lot of their production. That is, they can send it abroad in container ships and export wool as well as meat. But a country like India, which has 1.3 billion people, the 1.3 billion people can never become rich based on agriculture, because the amount of agriculture that will need to be produced will be so much that the world doesn't need that much food. So if the world doesn't need that much food and you still produce a lot of food, then basically the prices of food will come down. So you're not going to get much of an income that way. The important thing here is to remember that there is a distinction between large economies and small economies. By large, I mean a large number of people in it. And a small economy is, here I'm just talking about the economy not in terms of dollars, but in terms of headcount. 1.3 billion people is a different kind of thing, or a country is a different kind of a country than a country which has only, say, 5 million people. A 5 million people country can specialize. That is, it can start producing something and exporting and getting an income out of it. But a country like India mostly has to be self-sufficient in the sense that it has to consume what it produces. It cannot export so much that it becomes rich through exporting alone.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, let's talk of, you brought up the example of New Zealand. So would it be fair to say if New Zealand invested even more money in capital and even worked in R&D and had better technology, their wealth would automatically increase in spite of all the high production that they already have?
Actually, they don't have a very large amount of production relative to the world demand. You have to say whether they produce a lot relative to the number of people they have, but their production is not so much that it becomes a large part of the world's production. So we need to think in terms of that a small country like New Zealand can produce something like, say, meat or wool, and there's a demand in the world for that meat and the wool. But what will happen is that if they increase their production of, and say double their production for some reason, that will not alter the world prices of these things very much. They are a small part of the world demand for, say, meat or wool. So relative to their economy, the economy will become bigger if they produce more, but it will not, the supply won't be so dramatically high in the world, in the context of the whole world. It'll be a small amount. On the other hand, a large country like, say, China, if it is producing something and exporting it, and it doubles that production, then the prices will be affected. If you increase the supply of something, then the price comes down, given the same amount of demand for the good. Now, take this case of crude oil prices are at very, very low levels right now. It is below $40 a barrel. Now, why is the price of crude oil so low? That is, given a certain demand in the world for crude oil, if you increase the supply, there's a certain amount of supply, and the price settles to something below 40. Now, if a country like the oil exporting countries decide to maintain the same supply, the price will continue to be what it is, sub 40. But if they were to restrict the supply, they will affect the world prices, because they produce or they supply a significant percentage of the world's supply, and therefore they can, through their supply, change the prices. Whereas a small country exporting something will not be able to affect the price. They are just another supplier among other suppliers. So in the case of a small economy, it does not have the capacity to affect world prices. They just take whatever price they can get in the market, whereas large countries which are producing something, a significant percentage of the world's supply of some commodity, they can affect the prices. They can change the prices by restricting supply or by increasing the supply.
So if you think about, let's say, the US, for example, where only 2% of the population is engaged in agriculture, but it's a large enough population or a country that they have to be self-sufficient, at least in certain respects, right?
Most of the production of whatever we consume in the US is produced within the US. There is a lot of, in dollar terms, there's a lot of import and export going on, but it's a small percentage of the total economy. Whereas a small country like, say, let's talk about Singapore or Hong Kong, the economy of Hong Kong and the economy of Singapore. These countries, the total amount of import and export, if you add the value of the imports that they have and the value of the exports in dollar terms, it will be more than their GDP, the gross domestic product. It might be, say, 150% of their gross domestic product. That is, the total imports and exports add up to greater than 100% of their GDP. Whereas in the United States, it will be in the 10% or so, not more than that. Do you understand why a country like Singapore will have the total value of imports and exports exceeds their GDP?
Because they are not producing it themselves, but they are able to channel it somehow.
Well, it's like this. You import a lot of, let's say, raw materials. Say you import $100 of raw materials, and then you process it within your economy and then export it for $150, say. So because you imported $100 worth of stuff and then you exported $150 worth of stuff because you sold that stuff. So now what is your total import plus export? What is the dollar value of import plus export? It is $250, right?
Should both of these be on the same side of the equation?
No, I'm just saying, if we're just trying to come up with a figure that
Okay.
we imported $100 worth of stuff, worked on it, and then we sold it for $150.
Okay.
What we have done is we have added $50 to it.
Mm-hmm.
So what is our income now? Our income is $50 because
Right.
we bought $100, sold $150 worth of stuff, and so our income is $50, which is our GDP.
Mm-hmm.
Now, our imports were 200% of our GDP. You see, our
Right.
imports.
Right. Yes.
Or if you say, what's the export? Export was 300%
300.
of
Yep.
GDP. Okay, so that's how. If you say total import export is like 500% of our GDP.
Oh, very
Let's
interesting.
say in India, we let us assume that India imports $500 billion worth of stuff and exports, say, $200 billion worth of stuff. And India's economy is, say, $2 trillion. So our exports, which is $200 billion, is a very small part of the $2 trillion economy. That is our
Mm-hmm.
income. So what the point we are trying to make here is that small countries can export and import a large amount relative to the size of their economy. Whereas large economies, whether it's China or the US, they are a small percentage. Their exports or imports and exports are a small percentage of the GDP figure. We are not talking of GDP as exports and imports are not part of the GDP here. We are just trying to get a feel for how big or how significant exports and imports are for a country. For a country like the United States, exports and imports are very high. In dollar terms, they are very high, but relative to the economy, it's a small percentage.
Right. Okay. This is very amazing. This is an amazing insight to end this episode with. Then, thank you for
Okay.
your time again, Atanu. Until next time, then.
Okay. Bye.
That's it for this week, people. But don't forget to leave us your questions on Facebook at facebook.com/economically speaking. Our Twitter handle is at Econ Speaking. Each week, we chat with Atanu De on matters generally related to economics. This is Economically Speaking with your host Sudipto Chatterjee. Until next time, goodbye.